Thank you for listening to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. Just a quick announcement before we get into today's episode. I'm excited to share that Distinguished PE has officially launched 3 new self-paced courses. You can take them for graduate-level credits, for hours toward renewing your teaching license, or simply for your own professional growth and reflection. Each course aligns with a chapter from the book, Becoming a Distinguished Physical Education Teacher, and provides opportunities for authentic, job-embedded learning. The first course dives into promoting equity and inclusion in physical education, examining the impact of eliminating exclusionary practices, implementing small-sided games, elevating student voice, and transitioning from outdated to contemporary practices. In the second course, High Expectations for Student Behavior, teachers will reflect on class rules, practice communicating behavior expectations during transitions, and will understand the purpose and structure of a class reset. The third course, my personal favorite, explores standards-based content and language objectives. In it, teachers will reflect on why standards-based CLOs are important, the impact that they have on student learning and engagement, how to create them and communicate them in student-friendly ways, and how to check for students' understanding of them. You can earn 3 graduate-level credits for each course through Colorado State University Pueblo, 9 total if you complete all 3, which can help teachers move over on their pay scale in many districts. If you're looking for renewal hours, each course offers up to 100 hours toward your teaching license. To learn more or get registered, head over to www.distinguishedpe.com and click on Virtual Courses. The direct link to sign up is also in the description to this episode. My guest today is Jake Miller. Jake received his Bachelor's of Science degree in K-12 Physical Education through Boise State University, and then got a Master's in Leadership through the University of Idaho. After teaching elementary PE for 3 years, he has been teaching junior high physical education for the past 17 years, first in Montana and currently at North Junior High in the Boise School District. Jake has presented at state conferences in Idaho and Montana, along with being a national SHAPE presenter. He has also presented at the Professional Development Schools Conference, hosted by the University of South Carolina, along with his colleague from Boise State, Dr. Bell. He is a college adjunct professor and works closely with BSU as a mentor to their students and has collaborated with over 20 student teachers throughout his career. He has been actively involved in curriculum development in his district, along with reshaping and redefining district-wide assessments. Jake and I talk about why skill development should be the focus of a high-quality PE program and what the consequences are if it is not. We talk about how to efficiently assess skill development and how outdated practices like grading on participation and dressing out harm the reputation of our discipline. Jake also makes convincing connections between the strategies that he shares and the impact that they have on student engagement, how students view physical education class, and their behavior, especially in the locker room. Jake was also kind enough to share some resources, so be sure to check them out in the description to the episode. Jake is fiercely committed to doing what's best for students, and he's as unapologetically passionate as one can be when it comes to calling out practices that fall short. He speaks with conviction, challenges the status quo, and refuses to let tradition stand in the way of progress and diminish our discipline. If you're ready for a candid, no-nonsense conversation about physical education, you're about to hear it. And now I bring you Jake Miller. Jake, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for all you do.
Today we're going to be discussing what it means to prioritize skill development in a PE program, from how skills are taught and assessed to how teachers help students grow more confident in their movement. Let's start things off by talking about why you believe skill development should be the focal point of PE. What do students gain when we center our lessons around skill development?
Well, there's a reason it's SHAPE National Standard number 1. I think it's the most important part of our job. If we're trying to make and create lifelong movers, we have to first create students or people or humans who have the skill to do lifelong movement, whatever that is. And so when you teach kids how to actually do a skill instead of expecting them to be able to do it because they're human, when you actually teach them how to do the skill, you see their confidence skyrocket. So you see these kids who have always hated PE because in the past they have played traditional sport games or been expected to do X, Y, or Z. because they're human. I always tell my kids that I don't expect you to be able to do anything because you're human. My job is to teach you. And if I'm not teaching you and breaking the skills down, what am I doing as a teacher? I always put it back to math classes and things like that. They teach you the process. They don't expect you to be able to do a proof because you're human. But yet in our field, so many times we expect kids to be able to do all these movement patterns, whether they're gross movement patterns of running, skipping, leaping, without actually teaching and breaking down the steps. So once you teach kids the skill and how to do something and how to like learn from the very basic concept of it to a more advanced phase, they start developing confidence in that movement pattern. And that allows them, if they choose later in life to be a mover in that realm, to have the confidence to do it. If you look at college kids, adults, high school kids, middle school kids, and I'm going to ask a 13-year-old to go out there and do a sport and look like an idiot in front of her friends, she's not going to do it. There's a reason kids are shutting down in the movement world at a very, very high rate. And that's because they don't have the skill to do anything. And that comes back to us. We should be the leaders in teaching our kids how to be competent movers of their body. And then once we do that, you see motivation increase. You see kids start experimenting with their body, you see a huge skyrocket in confidence. You already have your 10% of your athletes of your class, which are fine. They're playing club sports, they're doing whatever. And yes, you can help them with their skill, absolutely. But why are we teaching to the 10%? We should be teaching to the 90% of students, which is our main population. And those are students who aren't genetically gifted with these natural skills, or they're not put in club sports, or their parents don't have the resources to do that. And yet they're just getting shoved through this PE realm without actually learning how to move. And so once we teach skill, we increase confidence, we increase motivation, and we increase movers.
We're having this conversation on the cusp of another school year. And one of the things that's in the front of my mind is building confidence in students, like you talked about, and the culture that teachers build in their PE classes in the beginning of the year. Can you talk a little bit more about how you build confidence among students? So, teaching them explicitly skill cues and how to make progress in specific physical skills is one of them. Do you have any other tips that you could share with teachers on how to build student confidence, especially early in the year?
I do a bunch of pre things when my kids come in. I want to get a background check of why they don't like PE and where they like it. I want to know my students. And a lot of them don't like it because they've been put in a situation where they've been put in front of their peers without the skill to be able to do a activity, and they've made themselves look like a fool. And there's no middle school kid that wants to do that. I don't care what school you teach at across the country. If you have middle school kids that don't feel comfortable performing or moving in front of their peers, you are setting yourself up for failure. Those kids should refuse to do the activity because they're protecting themselves. And that's the world they live in at the middle school range. I'm sure this is the same in high school and elementary. I've taught elementary in the past. It's the same thing. I pretty much don't do any traditional sports. So if you look at traditional sports and team sport, when people become adults or into high school, minus your 10% that do those team sports in high school or club sports, they don't get involved in that. Most of our clientele, when they become adults, aren't going playing 5-on-5 pickup basketball. That option is there. It is there for them to do. And I ask my kids every single year, how many of your parents do that? There's adult league volleyball and softball, and there's adult league dodgeball in our town. They have everything for adults, and very few of the parents do that. And so I talk to the kids about, why are we only teaching those sports if none of you see that modeled at home? When you don't see your parents doing those in life, when you guys yourself don't go do that. Some of you might be recess warriors, but most of you aren't. You're more along the lines of, doing stuff with your friends in smaller groups and things like that. So I eliminate that whole team concept. Now, we do small sided games and things like that all year long, but you're not going to see us play 5-on-5 basketball. And as soon as you eliminate that, you have just instantly won over 50% of your population, because they're coming into PE being like, I hate this class. And I hate it because I'm always put with so and so who makes me look like an idiot every single day. And I don't have the skill because I've never been taught. And so when you develop a culture of that, like my kids know, we don't ever play dodgeball. We're not playing 5-on-5 basketball. We're not playing volleyball games. They know that, and they don't ask for it. They know, because I've been there long enough, that we are going to start from the bottom and build ourselves up. And when you do that and you make it fun through many modified games or activities, they buy into what they're doing. When they see that, oh, no one's actually watching me. I'm never put out there on the pedestal where others see me not being able to perform. And with that, we also do tons of peer assessments, and we do video analysis and things like that of ourselves. And so we really make it personal about us. I also teach a variety of units where every single kid in my class is going to struggle. Every single kid. So my best basketball player, when it comes to us doing parkastics, which is parkour and educational gymnastics blended together, they struggle mightily. But over here, my kids who are my skaters and my skiers or whatever they're into, they thrive. And so we really build this community by addressing all these different units that we're doing where we're all going to struggle. We thrive on failure. Failure means we have something to learn from. Now, how do we react to the failure? And we talk about that a lot and we practice a lot. Day one, we do a class activity where it's a little game they play where it's just like a little pattern game. Every kid fails. No kid ever gets it right the first time, which is perfect. Because then I set my kids down and I say, look, every single person here has failed. Not one of you is going to be perfect this year. And that's okay. Now, the question is, how did you respond to that failure? Some of you who are a lot of times my traditional sport athletes started quitting because it's hard. Others kept on grinding and trying different things and trying, and oh my goodness, they finally figured it out. I said, this is the kind of student we're after in my class, is a student who, when it's hard, they analyze the result, they think about the process, they make a change to the process, which is called learning, and then the result changes. And eventually you keep making those changes. And so we build our culture through that. And one of the biggest things that's helped me is really getting away from the team sport stuff. I've taught team sport in the past. When I first came out of college, I'm a sport guy. I love it. It was a massive failure. Kids were not interested, minus my athletes, minus my 10%. They loved it, but that's not my clientele.
You bring up several great points there. One is how differentiation and moving away from traditional team sports can really level the playing field. The other thing that you talked about was teaching students how to respond to challenges when they win or when they lose, and how to persevere, things that are closely connected to our standards-based social skills, whether they're at the national level or the state level. Going back to skill progressions and prioritizing physical skills and students' progress towards them in PE, in order to build those skills, students need clear instruction and then also meaningful assessment. In your experience, what might be some common barriers that can make skill assessment and cue-based instruction feel difficult to implement for some PE teachers? And if they are missing in a program, what is at stake for students?
If it's missing in a program, what's at stake for students is they just get pushed through our system and they don't become competent movers. I see it. I see my kids come to me in 8th grade and I ask them who has been taught by their P teacher proper overhand throwing mechanics. We do a pre-assessment on overhand throw, which to me is not an 8th grade skill they should be learning for the first time. And I have, out of my class of 30, I'll have 3 kids who have a pseudo mature throwing technique, 3 out of 30, and other ones have no idea. And so if we don't do it, we are just passing these kids through the system without actually giving them a chance to be skilled movers. And it's not really even about the overhand throw. It's about learning a new skill. We shouldn't just pass kids through. We should be held accountable for actually teaching them.
And it goes back to confidence, like you spoke about earlier. It's not specifically about the overhand throw. It's about students feeling confident that when that skill comes up in some sort of modified game, whether it's in PE or elsewhere, that they can perform it with some level of consistency and feel confident enough to continue to want to engage in those physical activities with their peers.
Yeah, and the process of, like, learning a skill, I'm still kind of on this topic, and I tell my kids all the time, we do parkour things. I'm like, and we do, like, video analysis where they have to break down a video and create their own cues. This is further through my semester, but every activity at these kids' fingertips these days with YouTube and whatever channel they want, and they don't know how to do any of it. And to me, we can do our kids, our students, a huge favor by teaching them the process of progression and cue progression so they can create their own. I tell my kids all the time, I said, I want you to leave my class being able to take whatever skill it is, a kickflip on a skateboard, and I want you to watch that on YouTube and I want you to create 5 cues and I want you to be able to self-teach any skill. To me, that's powerful. That's learning how to move as a human because I can't teach, I could, but we don't teach kayaking. We don't teach a lot of these things that kids enjoy, but they can watch a video and they can learn that and they get the confidence from us teaching the cues, which help them learn the skill.
We've touched on assessment once or twice so far in this conversation. Some teachers still assess based on participation and not on progress towards skills like you're mentioning. What's the problem with that type of approach, and how does it impact students and even the reputation of a PE program?
The reputation of our profession across the country is under attack. And if people don't see that, to me, we're blind. I see it in my district. I have kids opting out like crazy now, and they opt out because they're like, nothing was taught to me in the past. And it's really hard for me to argue against that because it's really hard for me to say what was taught. Well, they learned how to play kickball. I'm like, they didn't learn a skill. They didn't learn anything. I'm not bashing on kickball, which I would never play it, but we're not teaching anything. And if we're not actually teaching anything, what are we doing for our profession? And if we are doing subjective based grading, which is participation, that's just based on my opinion. There's no core class that you walk in and, oh, I tried hard today in math, so I get an A. That doesn't exist because there's no concrete evidence. If a parent comes to me ever and wants to have justification for their kid's assessment or grades, and I have participation as my 80% of my overall grade, that's my opinion. And there's no evidence to back that up. And what am I going to tell a parent? Now, as soon as I do assessment based grading, where I have my skill assessments, and we do a lot of that, we kind of going back to the last question a little bit, we do a lot of that through video. Challenges people have are my class is too big. I can't do it. There's too many kids in my class. How am I supposed to assess every single kid? I use Google Classroom and they have a videoing capability. It's super easy to make an assignment on there. You can have them videotape the assignment and then I just spend, yeah, it takes me 6 or 7 hours to go through my kids. That's my job. And then when parent comes in and says, I don't understand, my kid is on this traveling team and they got a 2 out of 4 on this skill. I'm like, awesome, let's watch their video. And we pull it up and we say, here's the cues and they grade their own kid. And they're like, oh my goodness, why did my kid do it that way? And I can easily respond and say, hey, when we do assessments, they have a block of time, however much they need, 15, 30, depending on what it is. They have the cues right there in front of them. It's not a secret. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not trying to trick them. And they can take the video as many times as they want without me watching them. That's the powerful part of doing a video assessment for kids is I'm not sitting there watching them, which increases the stress and anxiety. I want like an accurate viewpoint of what they can do. So the video allows them to take numerous takes to analyze their video to the cues. And then when parents come in, if they did, and they wanted validation of why their kid got X, Y, or Z grade, I can pull up the video of all their skills that we've done all year long. And I can have them watch them and it's easy for me to justify. So now I'm showing concrete evidence of what I'm teaching. It holds me accountable for actually teaching something. This is another reason why a lot of people don't want to do skill assessments because now accountability is on me. If I do a skill assessment and my kids can't do it, I failed as a teacher. I need to reevaluate my unit. People don't also want to do them because it's harder. It's way easier for me to write down mile Monday on my lesson plan and do a mile every day and say I'm doing fitness. It's way easier. And it happens across the country all the time. Accountability for us has to rise as a profession to keep our profession alive. And it starts with people knowing that, oh, when you go to 8th grade PE at my school, you're expected to do this. If you're going to walk in there and think you're just going to give effort because you try hard. Now, my kids who try hard usually have success. My kids who try hard and have focused attention. And to me, the biggest difference in participation or whatever you want to call it, I call it personal and social responsibility. It is one of our national standards. National standard 3 kind of falls in that category. To me, it's focus practice. It's not just red and sweaty. So many times people want to evaluate their students on, oh, they came in and they're, red and sweaty or whatever. They ran really hard. But I'm like, was it focus practice on what we're working on? There's a big difference between coming in and being the kid just bouncing off the walls and running around and versus the kid who comes in and is focusing specifically on the cues. And then you see the kid who focuses on the cues excel on the skill assessments. And you see the kid who doesn't. Now, they might be red and sweaty, but are they actually focusing on the content? No different in math class. It's the kid who comes in and is super active and acting like they're doing paperwork versus the kid who comes in and really focuses on the concepts being taught. That kid has more success. And then it's easy for me to relay back to the parents. Here's why your kid had success in my class because they were able to do X, Y, or Z. Here's why your kid couldn't because they struggled with the cue concepts, which are broken down in baby steps. And we practice them over and over in different avenues or realms.
I'm thinking that the title for this episode could be something like How to Avoid the Red and Sweaty Monday Mile. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, and there's nothing, I'm not anti-fitness. I'm not anti-cardio. That's all so important stuff. I'm just very anti-lazy lesson plans. And if my kid goes to school and they make my daughter run the mile, I better see a skill test. I better see a skill test for you teaching her proper gait, proper flexion, proper hip, all that stuff. I better see that before I ever get an assessment for my daughter, because that would never fly in math class.
I'm really glad to hear you make connections to other content areas because I think that if one of our goals, and it should be for every PE teacher, is to bolster the reputation of physical education, not just in their school, but as a discipline, we have to compare ourselves to other content areas. I think in the book, I make a connection between a science teacher giving students daily points if they remember to bring their safety goggles to lab class. We can all agree that that sounds absolutely ridiculous and that not a single science teacher in the entire country does that. Yet when students walk into the gym, in some places, if they have gym shorts on, they get 5 points. I've experienced some pushback a little bit on social media from giving that analogy, and I'm really glad to have you in my corner. Just a couple follow-up questions based on what you said. So, I guess first is, where do you think that some of these outdated practices came from, and why do they still persist? You made me think with the Mile Monday, how I got assessed in it was probably upper elementary PE class. So I'm thinking like 4th and 5th grade. It was if you could run 1 full lap around the field outside, you got an A. If you could run half of a lap, you got a B. And if you could run a quarter of a lap, you got a C. If you wanted to go for the A plus, you guessed it, Jake. It was a lap and a half. 1 lap and a half. Like, where do you think that that came from? And why is it that some teachers, hopefully few teachers, still think that those types of practices are acceptable?
It's a very outdated practice. I think one issue we're running into in our profession is it starts from the top down. We don't have the expectation for who we hire. And I have a hard time in my district and in districts around the country where they hire people that don't have the proper qualifications, who haven't done the methods class, that don't know the pedagogy, who don't have the concepts of understanding of movement patterns and how to do it. They think that lots of places think that, oh, I was a physical trainer at this gym, I can be a PE teacher. And that's where a lot of that comes from. A lot of it comes from hiring coaches. In my opinion, again, poor hiring practices. We're hiring coaches to fill positions. This person's a basketball coach, but they can do here, plug them into PE and their lesson plan is Mile Monday. I think it also is people in our profession, and this might offend people, but there's a lot of really lazy people in our profession. They can justify it to standards if they have the mile on there. I don't have any idea how you would ever be able to justify that to a parent grading a kid on their physical abilities like that. And when I talk about skill assessments, my skill assessments do not at all relate to physical ability. Now, it's okay if some things are harder. Math is harder for some kids than others. My whole time in my class, I'm always relating what we're doing to math and science. We can't validate what we're doing to core classes, and why are we hired? Go hire a recess teacher and let our kids go outside and run around, save a bunch of money for the district. And I'm not trying to be mean. I just want our profession to rise up and be leaders instead of followers. Those that can't do, teach. Those that can't teach, teach PE. That's a very real saying across the country when you look at their experiences. I mean, look at your experience in PE. My experience, my dad was my PE teacher. I love my dad. He was terrible. We played dodgeball all the time. We had football for all middle school kids. That was part of PE was football practice in pads or volleyball or that was our PE. It was terrible. That's how I was raised. It was terrible. And I love my dad, but he was a terrible teacher, PE teacher. He was a great math teacher, but he got put in that PE realm and he was not good at it. And because he didn't have the experience to know any different. I think a lot of it's also lack of knowing. Like people don't know. They grew up seeing this kind of PE. I see it all the time because my parents come in for conferences and I used to have a pretty long line and they're like, "Wow, I wish we had PE that way. That would have made it so much more fun." And you're seeing we have to make a cultural change. Problem is our cultural change doesn't happen unless across the board, many of us get on board with changing how we're doing it. And so I think it's easy. It's always been that way. Some poor hiring practices, very low expectations from administrators on us. The credibility for what we have to do and the accountability for us is minimal. I could do mile 5 days a week in my school and probably could exceeds on every single one of my evaluations. And that's across the board, you know. And the people who lose out are our kids.
When I'm at my best and I'm presuming positive intent, I think it aligns with what you said about some folks just not knowing any better. It's based on their PE experiences as kids when they were in school and thinking that that's just the right way to do it. And then when you combine that with low expectations coming from building leaders, you really don't put teachers in a position where they can easily find the proper resources that they need in order to up their game, right? In order to learn more about the instructional methods that you were mentioning. So, I mean, that's one of the goals of this project that I have, is to make those types of things more accessible for people. You mentioned assessing students on these physical skills. I think there might be some folks out there, and you actually said it in your previous response, that you don't expect students to be perfect when they perform these skills. So then what does success at these skills look like, and how do you assess that? The way that I've always framed it is that I want to assess students' progress towards proficiency in these skills. Is that the way that you would frame it, or do you have a different approach?
I don't have outcome results. I don't like really assess the outcome. However, again, in math class, they teach you the steps. And if you do the steps, what happens to the answer? It's usually correct or real close. If I am teaching something, if they're doing the cues right and the result is not somewhat close, that's my fault. My cues are poor. I am missing something in my cue development. So when I go through and teach something, when they do their skill assessment, I am watching for Q1, which is some basic body position, whatever it is. And I will skill assess everything from overhand throw, underhand toss, catch above the waist, catch below the waist, one proper push up for push up technique, squat, lunge, hip hinge. I'm not doing deadlifts, but I'm talking about no weighted stuff, body weight. And it's all based on technique and the steps and progress. And so when I watch their final assessment at the end, I'm watching for those steps. Now, is it going to be harder for some kids than others? Absolutely. Again, is math harder for some kids than others? Absolutely. Do some kids have to practice English or writing or reading more than others? Absolutely. In my class, if you ever need more time to practice, you can always take my stuff home. You can retake any assessment I do all semester long. All you got to do is take that video again, email me that you did it, do it with your mom or dad or friends at home. It does not matter, anytime throughout the year, and they can redo it. And again, people say, well, that's not fair. It's genetic and things like that. But my cues are so basic because of my skill level of my students. And I come from a pretty fluent area. The ability of them is so low, in my opinion, for what they should be as an eighth grader, that I'm not assessing kids on running and throwing off the run, which really I should be. I'm assessing kids on stationary throw to a stationary target in eighth grade. Really, that should probably be a second grade assessment in the perfect PE world, but that's not where I live. And I'm willing to bet that's not where many PE teachers live if they are skill based. I do a pre assessment for everybody. And a lot of people will argue it takes so much time. You spend all this time assessing. My pre assessments are really quick. Like my overhand pre assessing, we're doing something across the gym where I want them to throw as hard as they can. So they're aiming at the far wall above their partner's head and throwing as hard as they can. And I can do my pre-assessment in relatively 4 or 5 minutes. I can see exactly who my bottom 10 kids are. I can see my top 2, and then I can see the rest. And I can pretty much know, okay, these top 2, I need to really address X, Y, or Z to help them. They might not be on our cue sheet because these skills are the ones that 95% of my students aren't there yet. And then I got 2 or 3 really, really low ones that moving is really hard for them. I'm going to modify the cues a little bit for them to really help them have success. And so I ask my kids all the time, I'm like, are my cues fair? Am I assessing you fairly? And a lot of kids struggle because they've never been assessed before. So I see a real, not a high failure rate, but my first skill assessment is not hard, but it's hard on the kids. There's a lot of kids who are getting 2s out of 4 and stuff like that. They've never been held accountable for learning the skill. So then we go back, we rewatch their video, we break down the cues again. And so they get this understanding, because my goal is, by the time we're done with my kids at a semester, they have the ability to process and understand each progression and not skip progressions. The kids who skip progressions are the kids who usually struggle when it comes to the skill assessment, because they've just skipped it because they're used to being an athlete, or they don't want to pay attention or focus on that specific element. And some of that comes back to, I got to be a better teacher. I always hold myself accountable. I change my cues every year. So like on a lot of these Facebook websites or blogs or whatever, I'm asking for cues, and people might think I'm like mocking them. I'm actually not. I'm actually looking, people that run the mile all the time, I'm always asking, what's your running cues? Like if someone has better ones than I have, I want to steal them. I want my kids to be able to be more successful. And it really works well for your kids who have always hated PE because they've never been successful. Because now your type A kids are like, boom, 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 boom. And they're like my 95% kids. And they're like, this kid's never got an A in PE in his life. I'm like, this kid knows every cue and the why behind every cue and they can perform and skill at a pretty good level for where they started, that's massive success for me.
A couple things that I want to elevate from that response. One is that I talk a lot with my guests about differentiating activities and not just modifying them, of course, but extending them as well. Like you mentioned, for those two students who might be at the top of your pre-assessment, how are you going to extend the skill cues and activities to challenge them as well? What I also hear you saying is that you don't just modify and extend activities, you modify and extend the assessments themselves so that students can experience success in them. The other part that I want to elevate is that you're assessing on the process, not on the product. So you're not giving students a grade if they can get 10 out of 10 free throws, for example. You're assessing them on the process that goes into whatever skill it is that you're teaching them. I want to follow up on one other thing because you just mentioned cognitive assessments. Is there room for assessing students on their abilities to understand the concepts behind some of these physical skills, or are your assessments and rubrics all physical based? And I guess the reason I bring that up is because, and I've talked about it quite a bit before, here in Denver, we have an expectation, a requirement actually, for all teachers, whether it's PE teachers, math teachers, literacy teachers, that students are not only making progress towards something standards based, their content, in this case, a physical skill, but they're also able to use language to articulate that learning as well. Can they compare and contrast today's skill to what they learned yesterday? Can they analyze a partner's skill and provide them with feedback? So in our PE programs here in Denver, we see two things. We see skill cues, like you've been talking about, and assessment on progress towards proficiency of those skill cues. We also see opportunities for students to use language to articulate their learning. Do you have space in your assessments for something like that?
Absolutely. I assess on 4 national standards. So if you look at my grade book, I have 4 categories: skill assessment, cognitive assessments, personal and social responsibility, which is standard number 3, and then physically active lifestyle, which is pretty much standard number 4, national standard number 4. And they all have grades in them. Every single unit I do, we will have a skill assessment, we will have a cognitive assessment. Cognitive assessment is not over the rules of the game. You can Google that. I could care less. I want you to be a doer, not a fan in the stands. I always tell my kids, we're not fans in the stand. We are people actively doing the activity. And so my cognitive assessments, and again, my students start off the year really struggling with these because they've never been held accountable for learning anything minus bones or the rules of the game or how big is a badminton court. I don't care about that. My cognitive assessments are all the whys. If I don't have a why behind my cues and kids can't comprehend and understand the result of their action came from this cue being performed improperly, and here's how I change this cue to change the result. And if I don't correlate those two concepts, I'm just making my kids be like robot movers. So my goal on my cognitive assessment is always the why. If I'm throwing to a stationary target and I miss high or low, which cue concept would you want to change and how would that alter the result? So we're looking at concepts like that. If I want to increase velocity on my throw, what 2 cues are going to help me? And some of those are very basic questions, like understanding what helps you generate power, velocity. But then you can have similarities and differences. What cue concepts are the same when you are underhand tossing versus other things? I can correlate them there because a lot of the cues are very similar. The hip hinge is done in everything, yet the hip hinge is only taught when you deadlift, which is, I'm not deadlifting my middle school kids, but it is like a standard position for any sport you do, but yet it's never taught. And the hip hinge is used in a lot of my other cue concepts, like and other skill concepts. And so they do correlate. And so, trying to get, understanding of that is what I'm really after.
I'm happy to hear you bring up that we shouldn't be assessing students on things like rules to a game or dimensions of a court. 25 years ago, when I was in college, I remember either taking an assessment on those types of things, rules or dimensions to a court, or our professors asking us to create one as if we were going to give it to students. And it just didn't quite sit right with me, but I didn't really know the shift to make. I was 22 years old. And I'm proud to say that, I made plenty of mistakes in my teaching career, but one mistake that I don't recall ever making was administering a rules assessment to my students. So I'm just giving myself a little pat on the back for at least getting one thing right back in the day.
No, I made a lot of mistakes too. I really avoided that. And, this kind of goes back. It kind of brought up the professor thing. And sorry, this kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, as far as a breakdown of our profession, I think it also starts with the university level. I think our universities aren't focused on skill development. They're more focused on getting numbers in their in departments and stuff like that. I'm a college adjunct at Boise State here, and I work very closely with them. And I am very lucky to have Dr. Bell, and he's a professor, just retired. He learned under George Graham at Virginia Tech, and so he was a very, very good influence in my life. He's still one of my really good friends. And John Bale, who I think is one of the best PE teachers. He's now administrator, but he was one of the best PE teachers I think in the nation. He was my mentor. And now I'm on the process of I've had 20, probably 25 student teachers under me. I'll have two more this year. I usually have two or three every single year. And the universities are struggling to find mentors who do it right. And sometimes universities do it right. They have these methods classes, and then they send their kids out to student teach, and they see it done, like we talked about, where they have the mile Mondays, and they're like, "This is not real life." And then the people in the PE world say universities don't understand. They're not out here with our kids, and the universities are saying, "Well, it can be this way if you set it up this way." So the disconnect there is really also part of our issue with our whole culture of what we're trying to do. That was kind of like a revert back to what we talked about earlier. But I think that's an important part that we need to address is we need to be good mentors for the future. I was very lucky. I had one, but I know a lot of people who aren't.
Let's shift a little bit towards a particular lesson. So, you already shared a little bit about the pre-assessment, right, with students throwing for power, right, or for force. Can you walk us through a typical lesson where skill cues and assessments are embedded into that particular lesson? And can you maybe share a little bit about how you introduce cues to the students in that particular lesson?
Yeah. So when my kids come to my class, they dress out every single day. We're like a campus that's not very closed off. And so, if we're outside, I need to know where my kids are. We obviously do not grade on dressing down. And they get about 3 minutes to dress on each side class, so it doesn't really affect us too much. But when they walk into my gym on my whiteboard, I always have the objective, which is our skill objective for the day, written. And then I have below that, I have my walk-in instructions. And that means when they walk in the gym, they do what the walk-in says. And they're not going to sit in row lines. They're going and doing whatever that is. And so that is kind of my instant activity. It's not going to be dynamic stretches. It's not going to be run laps when the music's playing. And some people do that, and that's great. Mine usually is some kind of activity that might have nothing to do with the lesson. It's just to get them moving for 2 or 3 minutes. After that, we'll bring them back in. I usually bring them back in where they're away from the whiteboard, and I'll ask one kid in the class to tell me the objective for the day. And so I want them to read the objective. Now, they don't have to have it memorized, but they have to have a rough idea. Oh, today we're working on X, Y, or Z, whatever it is up there. And my board will always say the skill we're working on, and it'll have bullet points of the cues that we're trying to attack that day. A lot of times the kids will not understand the cues because we haven't done it yet. And so they don't know what they are, but they know, hey, we're working on this skill. And I saw something about ball the wall or something. And again, that's just a cue I use. So then if I do a pre-assessment, like let's say that's like day one of a unit, a pre-assessment, I'll have some activity where they're doing the skill end result, full motion of the skill for a very short time, not in a game setting, in a very controlled setting, but it's done in mass. Everyone's doing it. There's no lines. We don't wait in lines in my class. Everyone's doing it. Then we'll bring the kids back in. And usually when I say in or out, we spend a lot of time in my class on transitions. I'm a stickler. I don't want to lose any class time. My kids, we go bell to bell. We need more time in class and not less. We have quite a few transitions at times, but the transitions are super quick in my class because we just practice and train, and the kids understand the value of our time. So we'll come back in and we'll kind of address the overall concept of what we're working on. Overhand throw, for example. How do we use it in the world? Think, pair, share. We'll do that real fast. So they'll think to themselves, they'll share with a partner, group of four, and then we'll kind of share the class. And again, getting them used to talk to each other about their life. I use overhand throw X, Y, or Z. How do you use it? And things like that. And so trying to open up that culture of where do we do this at? And why is this a skill that could be useful for some of us? Because some kids don't know why. At that point, I'll intro cue number one. And our kids know that we do peer assessment all day long. If we're doing an activity and we're focusing on cue number one, which might be a body position or whatever it is, I call it ball to wall, where we have, but actually we start with neutral position, which is our sideways position with the ball in front of us. And I ask kids, why do we do that? And a lot of times they don't know. So I'll go out there and I'll have them just throw back and forth really quick. We're not talking very long. We're talking 30 seconds. And I want their partner, if they're not doing it correct, to give feedback across the gym. And when they give feedback across the gym, it's not you suck, or that looks terrible. It's focus on, and they use the exact or the verbiage of what we're working on, side to target or whatever it is. And then I ask the kids, why do we do this? Why is this important? And they don't know. So then I say, okay, let's stand the other way. So then we turn our body now throw. And they're like, that felt weird, and okay, now let's stand with our belly facing. And then they talk, and then they kind of feel it instead of me just telling them. I want them to feel the reason behind my cues, and then we have ball to wall where they're getting really good extension behind them with their arm when they go back. And these are really hard habits to break. And some kids, I'm telling them, I'm trying to break 13 years of bad habits in 2 weeks. It's going to be really difficult. We're really going to have to break this down and focus on these concepts. And we'll focus on like one cue and they'll do it for a little bit, and we'll try alternatives to it so they understand why and what it feels like. Then we'll do a second one and focus on that. And then we'll put the two together. And again, we're giving feedback. And it sounds like my class is like drill and skill. And it's really not. The kids know that before we ever do anything with success, we have got to build our level of skill. They understand that there's no fun anything we do if we don't have the basic skill to do it. And so they understand that we're going to learn this basic skill, and the harder we work at it and the more we keep each other held accountable for it, the quicker we move on to modified small sided games. And so then we'll do like Q1, Q2, depending on the skill, probably 2 cues a day typically, depending on how skilled my class is and the pre-assessment. Sometimes 3. 3 is a lot for one day. My typical skill assessment is going to have 4 cues, maybe 5. 5 if one of the cues is real simple. But I don't have like 10 cues. That's way too many. So most days it's like 2 cues are taught per day. And then we'll do some at the end of class. We'll do some kind of modified game that they have no idea works the skill at all. They think it's wall ball where they're throwing a tennis ball off. It's not wall ball. I call it that. It's not like the one they play outside at all, but they're throwing a tennis ball off a wall. And I just want to see which kids are able to correlate any of those cues. Like, are we 5% of kids do it right now? Are we 10? Are some kids catching the ball, stopping and thinking about it? And then we'll rotate partners a lot and things like that. And what that does, again, it gives me feedback. Typically, the class always ends with some kind of visual assessment from me. I'll run somewhere in the gym. I'll stop the music. My kids will freeze and I'll say, I'm your target. Close your eyes. I'm your target. Show me Q1. And all the kids will close their eyes, and I'll look and say, okay, I got 40% of my students who have no idea what Q1 is. I take notes. Tomorrow I got to reteach. And we always reteach. We always come back because my goal is that, and again, my units are only like 10 days long. After 10 days, we have hit Q1 4,000 times. We have hit Q2 3,500 times, Q3 3,000 times, Q4 2,500 times. We have done so many activities that are all based around that skill. And again, it's not skill and drill. We do warm up with the peer assessments a lot of times after our instant activity. We'll do a lot of peer assessment stuff. That helps my kids study for their cognitive tests. When we're doing overhand throw and I'm saying, okay, you have this panel in front of you, and that's where we should be hitting. If a kid misses the panel, I'm not mad at the throwing kid. I'm talking to the kid that's assessing him. What happened? And if they're like, well, he's not very good or she's not very good, I'm like, no, no, no. What happened? And if they can't break down the specific cue of what's happening, that's my failure. That's me. That's me doing a poor job teaching the whys behind what we're doing. And so we do a lot of that kind of stuff. And then pretty soon in my classroom, you hear these cues just being spot off at kids all the time. And it's not mean. It's them helping their peers find success, because they know when their peers find success, it allows whatever activity we do, small sided game, whatever, to have more success. That's kind of the way we do it.
That ability to give and receive appropriate feedback, I know that it's a Colorado state standard. I'm not sure if that's worded like that at the national level. I don't quite think it is. But either way, I mean, more importantly, it's a real world skill that students are going to need for the rest of their lives. So to be able to teach that in PE class, I think is very powerful. One thing I wanted to highlight from that response, I could highlight 8 things, but I'll just pick one. You mentioned how you don't have enough time in your average class. I've talked about this plenty. That's one of the keys to success as a PE teacher, is to communicate to your students that you don't have enough time in the next 45 minutes or 60 minutes, however long your classes are, to accomplish all of the things that you have planned for them. We have these 3 different skill progressions that we're going to go through today. I have an awesome modified game that you are going to absolutely love at the end of class. The only way that we can get to all of those things is if we do A, B, and C, right? And that includes getting dressed in an appropriate amount of time. That includes coming in and doing the intro activity. All of those other components, transitions to getting equipment or going to their home base spots, etc. One thing that I noticed in the thousands of PE lessons that I've been able to observe in this role that I have as an instructional coach in DPS is that a common theme among PE lessons that are not effective is that the pacing is too slow. And students pick up on that. And when it happens one day, and then it happens the next day, and then it happens the next day, students start to internalize that when we come to PE, we don't have to really get all that much done. There's no rush. We have plenty of time. One of the best examples I can give of this is when I observe a lesson, and this is very rare that this happens. We'll be 10 minutes into a 45-minute lesson, and students will just be walking around the perimeter of the gym. I don't need to see anything else. I can tell you exactly what the rest of that lesson is going to look like because students have no urgency, as opposed to what you described, which is when you greet your students at the door and you say, hey, we've got 3 minutes to get changed. I need to see you in the gym, reading the board, and engaged in that instant activity within 3 minutes. That sets the tone, not just for that lesson, but for the rest of the school year, that when we get to PE, we mean business and we have a lot to accomplish. We're not just going to be wandering around and wasting time in our class. One thing that a lot of teachers talk about is exploratory time and giving students the opportunity to discover some of these skills themselves. I wonder if you have room in your lessons for exploratory time and how you might implement that. You gave one example, which was connected to the why. So you might approach a student and ask them the step with the same foot that they throw with, just so that they can see how it feels. And that's a form of exploring as well. Do you have any other ways that you give students opportunities to explore what the cues to a particular skill are, as opposed to just telling them straight up what you're looking for?
Yeah, we do. It's hard because time is a thing. I mean, that's a fact. I can teach it relatively quickly, or if I do exploratory stuff, it's really important and powerful, and it's necessary. But I do it like I do it with my golf unit. We do a small long handle implement golf unit, and I tell the kids, here's a golf club. My rule is don't throw it and don't bash a hole in the floor. And I want to see how you would hold it and how you would swing it. And I said, I want you to explore with your body. I said, the rule is you can't run with it. We have all our safety protocol in place. And I'm just shocked by how many kids just won't even try it. Like they don't know how. They don't even know how to like experiment with their body of like, do I hold it? They kind of have an idea. Then they start watching others and seeing others but they don't just like grab it and go. And I think that goes back to it's a confidence thing of being afraid to look silly when you don't know anything about an activity. But we'll do exploratory stuff with a lot of our body movement stuff. I do a movement culture unit, which I think is side note, but I think this is the future of PE fitness. I think mobility should be movement culture by Ido Portal, he's amazing. It should be the future of all our fitness-based mobility stuff, pretty much all our fitness-based stuff in PE. But we do a ton of exploratory stuff with their bodies there. I want to see if you can move your body in this realm, or what do you think? How small can you make your body and how big can you make it? Sounds like very elementary like stuff, but it's the same with middle school because all our levers have changed. Like we're now taller. We have to reteach. Like elementary kids, they're compact and they're pretty good at stuff, but then all of a sudden they grow 6 inches and their arms are long and their legs don't move, and they have to we have to reteach and understand that our kids physically are changing as they grow and mature and hit puberty and et cetera, et cetera. And we have to reteach a lot of skills with that. And to do that, we have to give them opportunity to try stuff on their own. And then a lot of times they get close. And that's great. If my cues don't need to be taught because you figure it out on your own, heck yeah. It's no offense to me. That's a win-win because that means we're learning the skill the right direction. I probably should do it more. There's lots of things I should do more as a teacher, and that's one of them. And so it's something I need to work on and I do a little more of. There's a lot, like you said earlier, I'm not perfect. I know I need a lot. There's a lot I need to work on and change in my profession, and I'm always open to new ideas and new concepts. It's not an ego thing. It's what's best for my students. And that's one thing I need to add a little more. And it's important, but it's not as important as me getting through the units I need to get through, if that makes any sense.
These ideas that you're sharing with listeners are very impactful. Let's say that we're starting to convince people that they shouldn't be assessing on things like gym shorts and t-shirts, and that they should be using standards-based rubrics, all the things that you've been talking about, pre-assessments, etc. How do you remove some common barriers? For example, things like large class sizes. Somebody might say, well, you know what, I have 35 or 40 students. I really like what Jake's saying. I connect with it. I'm willing to try it because I want to provide the best opportunities for students in my PE program. But then they look at their roster and they see that they have 40 students. Do you have any advice for teachers on how to do something like a pre-assessment in an efficient way?
When I first started teaching, I taught in a district prior to this in Idaho still. And my first class walked in, there were 60 kids. And I was sharing a gym with someone else who had 45 kids, and they didn't really care about teaching. And so I ended up with 105 kids. I only worked there for 3 years, but you have to prioritize what's important. So you go through all your skills you want to teach when you have a massive class size, and you have to shrink, in my opinion, you shrink the cues because it's going to take you longer to get through that content with more kids because you're going to have more kids who struggle with this or with that, and your management's going to be a little bit harder, and you're going to have less time because you're moving more kids. So, in my opinion, what you should do is your pre assessment should be very simple, a quick checklist of where they're at. I would do video assessments for every single one if you have the ability to. Most schools now have Chromebooks or some kind of access to that they could use. That eliminates you having to watch each kid individually in front of them and do any kind of rubric checklist. My average class size is like 26, so it's great. I'm very lucky what district I'm in. So some of my harder skills, I'll get up to 6 Qs, which is a lot, but Q1 and Q6 are really simple basics. So there's really four. But if I had 60, I was doing 3 Qs max, 3 Qs, because then I could really focus on those three. Now, was I going to reach the desired outcome I want? No. I'm not going to have kids getting to this level, but I'm going to have everybody getting to this level, and that's going to give everybody a chance. And then if you hope that you're in a district or an area where there's any continuity that the next year they can take those 3 Qs and progress. That's the dream. The dream is we're building these Qs from kindergarten until they're a senior. And by the time they're a senior in high school, their ability to move is phenomenal. If you could ever do that, those bigger schools, 6th grade, they're going to learn these 2 Qs of overhand throw. 7th grade, they're going to learn these two, and we're going to add this third one to it. 8th grade, they're going to learn those 3 Qs they learned in the past, plus this last one. So now by the time they leave 8th grade, you create a culture where big class sizes, not a problem because we're building on the same skills every single year to get these kids going to high school with a good set of basic movement skills.
Can you expand just for a moment on the students who record videos of themselves performing skills? I think you mentioned earlier that they might do that outside of PE class. Do you also have opportunities for them to do it inside class? Sometimes where I've seen that incorporated would be like various station activities where one station is an assessment where students are going to record themselves. What other ways do you incorporate those video assessments?
It depends what we're doing. Like I do a golf one and I'll have 5 stations set up in the gym and they will record. There'll be 2 full swing stations. So they have 2 options to do it there. Either one, if they want to practice at one or they want to record it, both of them and take their best video and submit it. That's fine. And then there'll be 2 like chipping and then 1 putting station. So I've done station work. I do a unit I call it How to Be Successful in Sport. It's based on moving. Like kids don't understand that there's one fastest kid in the gym. There's one fastest kid on your favorite NFL team, and the rest of the people are very successful. How and why? And they don't understand. So I do a unit that teaches change of speed, change of direction, and I skill assess on all that stuff. And so they can learn how to use their brain to create separation. And so that's like one we'll do a little bit bigger of an assessment where they're running and they're using plant, push, accelerate, and all these cues we talk about. And so that'll be like I'll give them like 15 minutes. Whole class, you got 15 minutes, and I have the gym kind of sectioned off in areas where one person can be running, the other person can be filming if needed. And the or the out of class option, every skill test we do, let me rephrase this, is done in class. They're given ample time in class to do it. And if I've taught the unit well, it should not take 2 class periods of skill test. It should take 15 minutes max to skill test, max. And if they want to redo or they end up having a bad day, kids have bad days and they come to school and who knows what happened to their home life or whatever, they can always redo it at home. It gives them an opportunity to do it maybe when they're in a location that feels just a little bit better to them, a little more comfortable. I've had kids, they'll do it in their street. and they do their little plant push accelerate, and that's great. I've had kids do their parkour routines in their house by moving furniture, and they're like, I'm like, I wouldn't do that, but if they, it just, if it, I want them to be comfortable. And so in the classroom, yes, they're given a chance to do it. They're given time. I do stations. I also do like, you got 15 minutes, and I have a big clock running. And I say 15 minutes, if you're out of time after class, come see me. If you need more time in class, we can do it at lunch. We can do it. And I give up a lot of my time, but my job is to be there for my kids. And so I don't mind giving up my time for my students.
I want to ask you a quick question about your curriculum because you talked at the very beginning about incorporating a lot of non-team sports into your curriculum. So, can you just give us a quick list of some of the other units that you like to teach? Because I feel like a lot of teachers will be on board with that, but then when they start to think of ideas, they think of, okay, golf, parkour. That's all I got, right? So, what are some of the other non-traditional units that you teach in your scope and sequence?
So I do an outdoor one. So we'll actually go outdoors right off the bat because we'll accumulate that with a 3-day trip where I took 120 eighth graders 2 years ago. We couldn't go last year because of fires, but we went up in the mountains and no parents were allowed to go. And so we did like archery, we did rafting, we did shelter building. They were given no tents. They had to build a tent with paracord and tarps, and they had to use strikers to start their fires, kind of like Bear Grylls ish. They had to cook all their own food, and the kids love it. It's like the best thing for their eighth grade experience is this 2-night, 3-day trip that we take. So I do an outdoor unit, which has like climbing in it. We'll rappel. We used to rappel off like the backstop. We used to rappel off the top of that, off ladders and stuff. And I've pressed in front of our school off these trees, which I'm not like a Bear Grylls guy. I love the outdoors. I love to fly fish and stuff like that. But I just learned basic skills that I could teach kids. So that's our outdoor unit. I still do like a gross, I call it like gross motor skills. It's really like overhand throw, underhand toss, catching above your waist, catching below your waist, and striking. Just basic concepts they should know by the time they get to middle school. I do a dance unit every single year. I just call it conventional swing. It's not bar dancing, but it is. It's wedding dancing. It removes a lot of the footwork, the frustration part, and it breaks the barrier of what dance is. That one I have a little harder time skill assessing on, I'll be honest. I do not ever do skill assessments that require partners, ever. I've done line dancing and things like that. I've done create your own TikTok. I'm not a TikTok person, but create your own dance like TikTok, where I had all the wrestling mats set up in these little cocoons. And so kids would go in these little cocoons in the gym so no one could see them, and they'd make their own videos based on rhythm, what we taught and stuff like that. I do a fitness unit like most people in my fitness unit, in the weight room. We spend 2 weeks up there, and it's all based on learning muscle strength, muscle endurance, cardiovascular health, and all those components. They are important. And I skill assess in those on, like I said earlier, squat, lunge, hip hinge, no weights, one push up, it's all technique based stuff. I do parkour. I call it parkastics, parkour and educational gymnastics put together. I do movement culture, which again is kind of pushed on by an old student teacher I had. He kind of introduced it to me, and I was like, "This is amazing." It's all movement stuff, animal-based movement, ground-based movement stuff, brachiating, hanging, resting, squats, and it kind of has this pyramid of hierarchy of why the human body falls apart. And my kids are shocked how many of my kids can't do a resting squat with their butt to the floor at the age of 13, which means already losing mobility in their hips, knees, or ankles. They have to own it and change their lifestyle, or it's going to get worse. At the end of that unit, they actually go home and put their parents through a complete mobility assessment, and then they evaluate themselves to their parents, and they want to try to make life changes based on what their parents did, and so they can be healthier than their parents when they're at their age. Trying to think what else we do. We do a badminton unit. When I say no traditional sport, I mean no like team sport stuff. So we do a racket sport. We do badminton because we don't have any facilities for anything else. I do a golf unit for a long handled implement. I do how to be successful in sport, which is how to change speed, change direction. And there'll be some, zone versus man concepts in there in case kids are interested. It is not sport specific. That'll be like sprinting technique and how to go from slow to fast, fast to slow, and things like that, which they can use in sport if they want to play sport, but it's not sport specific of this is basketball today, or we're doing football, or we're doing ultimate frisbee. But it's that concept that works through all team sports. I'm sure I'm missing some. I have like my rhythmical stuff. I'll do some juggling stuff I'll throw in there. Our facilities are pretty bad. We have 1,000 kids in our school roughly, and we have one gym. We have a weight room on the stage, and we have a wrestling room, which is a classroom with pads on the floor. And so we had to be pretty creative when we teach. I have to teach 2 units at one time. It's really hard because I do not get the gym 5 days in a row. I get the gym, like, 2 days in a row, 2 days a week. And so I'll do something I can do in the gym, and I'll combo that with a different unit downstairs, which is not really fair to my kids, but it's the best we can do. And then I try to make sure when I combo those, my unit in the gym is maybe a little bit more cue heavy, and my unit in the wrestling room, maybe swing dance or something like that, which is not quite as cue heavy. And so it's not overloading my kids with these cues from all over the place, and so they don't get all jumbled up. Because no one that teaches PE works in the perfect facility or has the perfect work environment, and so we have to do what we have to do to be successful. Those are some of my units I do, and I change them every single year. I try to add new ones and take other ones away.
I think those are a great place for teachers to start. So if they want to swap out their basketball unit this year with parkastics, is that what you called it?
That's what I call it, yeah.
With a parkastics unit, I think that that would be a fantastic starting place for them. You made me laugh when you said that the students go home and do a mobility assessment with their parents. About once every 6 months, my mom will come up with some sort of longevity test. And I don't know where she heard it from. I don't know what she's clicking on online or if her yoga teacher taught it to her. But we'll meet up for dinner and she'll say, "Did you know that if you can get up off the floor without using your hands, you're gonna live until you're 95?" She's like, "Let's try it." And then there we are, trying to get up off the floor without using our hands, which I can do, by the way.
That's right. No, and then I do yoga. I forgot I do yoga also. I do that unit also. Yeah, and it's just us being real with, and being creative. Is it's I'm not an expert in any of these things. I'm not. I do yoga once a week. It's hard for me, but I see the power and I see the value in it for my students too. And you can see it with your kids, like you said.
All right, I've got 2 more things for you. You got the energy for it?
Oh yeah, I go all day. I love this.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I like to do is, and we've been doing this throughout the conversation, is to tie all of these things back to the impact that they have on students. So if you could summarize any changes that you've noticed in student learning or student engagement since you've incorporated a lot of these strategies into your practice. We've already talked about the confidence level and how that changes based on the things that you're talking about. When you put this type of physical skill development front and center, what impact does it have on students' engagement and their learning?
The first is their behavior. First and foremost, you eliminate team sports, you're cutting out 90% of your behavior problems. And those come from kids who hate to lose, don't know how to lose, and kids who don't have the skill to compete. So I don't have the skill to compete, but yeah, you're going to throw me out there and make me play 5-on-5 basketball. I'm going to hack the hell out of you until I win the game. And I'm going to cheat and lie. And now so and so's pissed off and they're going to the locker room yelling at each other. And no wonder PE teachers have locker room issues. It stems from a poor lesson. It absolutely stems from a poor lesson. And I know that because I have seventh graders, which I do not teach in my locker room, and I hear them, and they do a lot more team sports than I do, and I hear their bickering daily, and my kids are like, "What? No one cares. Stop. We don't have it because we don't do it." So behavior is one big thing you'll see change right off the bat. You'll see way less behavior problems because it's not a competition. You're still competing against yourself, but you're not competing against others. Confidence skyrockets. I mean, I know I'm not saying this because, I think I do everything great, but I have to like make kids sit out when they're hurt. They sneak into my lesson every day. I never have a kid want to sit out. I have not great on dressing down 18 years. I've never had a kid refuse to dress down so they can go to the office and sit in the office ever. So participation skyrockets, effort skyrockets, the culture, the community of culture, which is, talk about personal and social responsibility in our moving world. We have a responsibility to have proper etiquette of how we mountain bike. There's rules there. How we ski on the ski hills. There's rules there. And the rules are to keep everyone safe. So you see the culture and the love in your classroom culture skyrocket when it's not about who can be the best, but you see others starting to support each other and you see empathy for those that, oh man, I can see that's really hard. I'm going to help so and so out. It eliminates the picking partners concepts for me. Like, it's not a problem who your partner is because you're like, oh, I don't want to be with so and so because they're terrible. They're terrible at what? We're not playing a game. Like, it's not a game. It's not about anything we do. Small sided games. It's not really result based. Like, I don't have a score with it. And when you do that, you eliminate all the things that kids hate about PE. They hate being put in front of their peers when they don't have the skill. They hate boring lessons that are just the same thing every day that are slow paced, like you talked about. Like, you should over plan. Your board should have, oh man, I didn't get to the bottom three. Great. We had a rocking lesson, but I overplanned, which is great. Bump that to tomorrow, overplan again, and you eliminate all those issues that people complain about. Because when you go to professional developments and stuff like that, I hear all the time, you don't have my kids, Miller. You don't have my students. And I'm like, I have really wealthy students and I have refugees, and they blend together in my class, and you would not know the difference. And it's the culture our community has created. It's a culture that I have created. It's a culture that this kind of teaching creates. It eliminates the stuff that makes kids hate PE. And there's so many students who hate PE, which means they hate moving. And you wonder why our country is having issue with obesity, et cetera, et cetera. It stems back to people not knowing how to move. And that should stem back to us failing at our jobs, in my opinion.
During the course of a year, there's always a handful of teachers that I struggle to support because I'll see things in their classes where, students are not following transitions as they're supposed to. Students are engaged in disruptive behavior, or they're off task, or they're arguing with each other. And something that I learned from you that I'm really going to emphasize this year with those teachers, because I feel like in my feedback, I kind of get stuck on the same things. Well, did you plan what language you want to use for your transitions? Like, do you know how you're going to communicate your expectations? Do you have a purpose for the day? Like, what is your objective? How are you communicating it? How are you going to assess students on that? Those things are all great, but I think that's the track that I tend to get myself stuck in. What I'm going to start with this year is analyzing the lesson to see if the activity was result based, because the phrase you used was non-result based activities. And I'm going to start with that. If the teacher is giving students games to engage in that are strictly about competition and who wins and who loses, that's the first thing that I'm going to suggest that they change. And then we're going to see if some of the pieces start to fall into place before I go back and give them that standard type of feedback that I'm used to giving them. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that. One of the things that I've been trying to do with teachers at the end of our conversations is to present them with a scenario that's based on the things that we're talking about, and then we can kind of work ourselves through this real world scenario together. I'll read it to you. Feel free to, we can make any modifications we want to in order to make it applicable to the teachers who are listening. So a fellow PE teacher at your school still gives participation grades and is skeptical about using skill-based rubrics like you've been talking about. They argue that it's not fair to assess skill development when kids enter PE with such different ability levels. They ask you how your students respond to skill-based grading and if it's really worth the extra effort. You talked about the videos that you watch and the extra time that you put in to grade these various assessments. How do you respond to that conversation, and what would you show them from your own practice in order to change their mind?
I mean, that's happened in a lot of schools I've worked at.
I feel like I've had you at a low simmer during this conversation. I'm trying to raise that up to a boil here with this scenario.
Yeah. Uh, one thing I do is I lead by example always. It's easy to take the other road. It's easy to stop doing those things because it is less work. And so I always lead by example. And in my experience through my years, after a couple years of them seeing this, all of a sudden in my situation, when it's their turn to be in the gym, and I looked on the wall and I saw cues, I was like, where'd this come from? They start to see a couple things. One, they see that the locker room is way more peaceful. I always go back to core classes. I got this when I was in college from Dr. Bell and stuff, is if we can't validate what we're doing with another core class, English, math, science, world studies, whatever it is, what are we doing for our profession? So if you walk into math class and like you said, and you get 80% of your grade comes from just showing up with the pencil and trying, is that going to be valid for any kind of learning? And what are we actually teaching our students? Then I also talk about discipline problems. Like, what's the biggest issue you see? Well, so and so won't participate and so won't participate. I'm like, why do you think they hate moving? Kids don't hate moving. People don't hate moving. At the core of humans, we do not like to move. You see massive joy being released through their faces and their body language. Obviously the chemicals in their brain when moving happens the right way. And so I help them. I'll walk you through. I'll help you with this. And it's not, I want to hold your hand, but I want to see your kids be successful, because when your kids are successful, my kids are more successful. And those are our kids. So let's try 2 cues instead of 4. Ask the kids through some kind of survey if they like being taught the skill first before they just play the game. And you're going to see the athletes are going to be like, no, I hate it. And 90% of your kids are going to be like, it was nice to actually know how to do something before being presented in front of so and so to have to perform. It's a really tough battle because I flat out want to come out and say it's crappy, lazy teaching, and I could hire a recess teacher to do your job and pay them half your salary and save our district a lot of money. So trying to get them on board, I make the rubric for them. I present my information to them. I have no problem sharing my stuff. People that have asked me, and I just share out Google Docs with them, and I'm like, just make it your own because I want every kid to have that experience. And I think we have to approach it in that manner. It's not my kids versus your kids. It's our kids in our nation and our world are the ones that are suffering if we do a poor job in our profession. Now you gotta be really careful saying that because they get really offended.
Well, I think your approach is going to limit the level of offense that they feel because you talked about asking them some reflective questions. So you're not immediately telling them exactly what they're doing wrong or why their students are fighting in the locker room. You're just asking them some questions. And I think that that's really powerful in order to get teachers who find themselves in those situations to start thinking about the changes that they could potentially make. And then you brought it back to students and the impact that some of these practices that you talk about today has on students. I also think that a peaceful locker room really should be the bow on the top. I mean, if the teacher's having trouble with students in the locker room, which many secondary teachers are, doing the things that you talk about today and making that connection between a more peaceful locker room where students aren't arguing who won and lost the game. I mean, to me, that's a major selling point. So I appreciate you sharing all those with the people who listen.
You'll also see it from the staff. You'll hear people stand up for your program. I hear people in my school say, "Well, that 8th grade program is different." They talk to parents and parents now have siblings, they're coming up, they're like, "Oh, no, my kid's taking your class," because they know it's different, and you build that reputation in your community, and then when other teachers start hearing that, if they care about what they do, and I think a lot of PE teachers really do care. I think they're trying to do the best they can. I think they're in it for the right reason. I'm not sitting here saying they're not. I really hope they're in there for the right reason. But we have to be reflective of ourselves. I think that's one of the hardest qualities we are as teachers in general is we ask our kids to reflect all the time and then we don't do it. Like if we're not giving a survey that's pretty hard on ourselves at the end of the school year for our kids to come back at us and tell us the truth about what we're doing, what are we doing? Like we expect our kids to evaluate themselves all year long and we can't take any heat. Like we should be taking heat from our kids. My class has completely changed many different things based on my kids giving me feedback that I didn't even think about. I changed my complete website program to make it easier. I changed all my study guides. I changed a ton of things because my kids said this would make it easier. Have you ever tried this? And I never even thought of that perspective. But we have to be open as teachers to adapting. If people change this style of teaching, I promise you they will enjoy teaching again. I mean, I see teachers that come home and they're always, "Oh, I'm so burnt out. We had so many fights," and I'm trying to always motivate. How do you motivate lazy kids? Don't have a lazy lesson plan. Don't have a lazy unit.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jake. I appreciate those connections that you make. Thank you so much for your time, for spending the better part of an afternoon sharing your expertise with listeners. I can't thank you enough for all the work that you put into this conversation that we had today. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for doing what you're doing and keep spreading the message. I'm happy to help or collaborate anytime. I'm always looking for people who want to share cues or change my cues or give me better insight. So I love what you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing. We need more people like you who are, leading the charge and others need to jump on board in our profession.
Right back at you, Jake. We'll do it again one day.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.